What's good, everyone? Evan Jarvis here, and today we are going to be doing another tier list for Heroes of Hold'em. Today we are going to be doing a tier list for all the Druid abilities in Heroes of Hold'em. For some context, this tier list is going to focus on when you're playing the tougher field tournaments that have more of the regulars in them, when you're playing against more opponents who have abilities they can cast as well as for the zombie horde where you're playing, that massive field tournament where you can get the most rewards. It's not going to focus so much on the small sit and goes where you have, 2 humans and 4 NPCs, or even 4 humans and 2 NPCs. But I will speak to the abilities that do benefit in those. Generally, a minion-based build can really thrive in those small field tournaments, whereas in the tougher fields and the bigger fields, you're going to want more of just a power-based character. And in terms of my expertise, I finished in the top 10 on the season leaderboard, despite grinding much lower volume than the players who finished above me. I've final tabled the zombie horde countless times, and I've also got a good amount of wins against the strongest players, highest ranked players in the game. So I can definitely hold my own. And Druid is one of the characters, one of the heroes that I've enjoyed playing the most. It's got a lot of really cool things going for it, that it has kind of the board changing abilities of the wizard and the necromancer, but it also has some of the minion based stuff that the clerics and the necromancers have. And it's also got some really good healing abilities and anything that the warriors would have. It's got too much like warrior-ish stuff. It's a few like free chips spells. But overall, it's a really well-balanced, really strong class that I'm really excited to share my thoughts and strategies on. And so hopefully with this tier list, you'll be able to build your druids more effectively, get more caches, and ultimately get more wins. Without further ado, let's get into the list. We are going to start with what some consider to be the very best ability in all of Heroes of Hold'em. It is Barkskin. When losing at Showdown, heal for 50% of the pot lost in health. Brittle, S tier. It is S tier first off because it's a healing spell. Healing spells are always going to be at the top of my list. If you've watched my tier videos, you know that healing spells go at the top. But it's also the amount. 50% of the pot lost in health. So if you played an all-in pot heads up, 50%, you're getting your health back. That's the same as the clerics Holy Shield, 100% of health lost in a pot. But if you're in a 3-way pot and you get 50% of it back, you've increased your stack 50%. If you're in a 4-way pot, 4-way all-in, and you cast this, you've doubled your stack. So where the warrior has fully armored that gets 35% of the pot back, Barkskin gets 50% of the pot back. And you can just try to force multi-way all-ins and then cast Barkskin, and it's just epic for the amount of healing that you can get. Definitely must-have ability on the Druid. And I remember for a long time it was the most expensive ability in the store prior to it being made brittle, which means it cannot be regenerated. It can only be used once per event. Prior to that, people were paying $20, $30, $40 for this ability because they just cast Barkskin, regrow it, cast it again, and just coast into the money. But fortunately, the devs saw it was a little bit broken and fixed it up, and it's still S tier. It's just not S+++. Okay, next we have Bear Form. Pre-flop and under the gun. Raise the big blind 200% without costing yourself health. This is an A tier ability for me. It's a free straddle spell. The reason that it's A tier instead of S tier is because there's no extra benefit with it. We've seen in lots of the other tier videos that the free straddles also come with a debuff when your opponents fold to it. Bear Form is just free 2x raise under the gun, clean free straddle, still extremely valuable, giving you free chips, really useful at the higher blind levels. Not quite S tier though, and the Druid has a lot of other really good abilities, which you'll see why the free straddle didn't quite make it to S tier, even though it's close. Next we have Bountiful Feast. Leech 25% of each minion you control's health pool. This one I'm throwing in the D tier. It's for a minion based build, and actually, you know what? I'm gonna throw it in the C tier because there was another one I was thinking would maybe be C tier, but I'm gonna flip flop it. It's for a minion based build. You leech 25% of each minion you control's health pool. So firstly, I don't usually do minion-based builds with druids. I don't see anyone doing minion-based builds. I have played around with it, and there are some pretty cool things you can do with a druid minion-based build. But first off, it's pretty rare that people do it. And secondly, you know, leeching 25% of their health pool. First, you need them to have high health pools. And for that, it is a combination of basically using all the minion-based abilities, which we're going to go through in this tier list. But on its own, Bountiful Feast not going to be enough to get the job done. It really needs to be used in conjunction with a bunch of other abilities to get that benefit, because 25% of their health when they have starting stack, nothing crazy, but 25% if you buff them up to 2, 3, 4x starting stack, now starting to get a little interesting. Next we have Confusion. Target opponent's next betting action is randomly selected from check, call, minimum raise, or fold. Sounds fun, sounds useful. You know, you can like kind of mess with someone, but you can't force them to go all in, and you know, it's only 25% of the time you're going to get them to fold, and you only get to use the ability once. So if Confusion lasted for the rest of the hand, you know, their flop, turn, and river were all random, now it's getting a bit more interesting, but I'm pretty sure you cast on the flop and it only affects their decision on the turn. And since, you know, fold's only going to happen 25% of the time, which is generally what you'd want when casting this, I just don't think the utility is that high. Next, we have Cycle of Life. If you eliminate a minion, revive a minion you control that was previously eliminated with 75% of the average health pool. So again, if we're doing a minion-based build, this actually can be kind of interesting. So I'm going to throw this in the C tier, because if you're doing a minion-based build, the more minions you can keep in the game, the better. And it's not going to be that hard to take out someone else's minion. Right? You do need to get in a situation where you're in a pot with a minion and you eliminate one, but it could even be one of your own minions. And if you're doing a minion-based build, there are going to be a lot of minions in play, likely, and being able to get one back with a decent amount of health is going to be of some value. So C tier for that. Speaking of minions, next we have Domestication. Gain control of target non-dragon minion with less health than you. This one's going to go into B tier. It is still in that family of minion-based builds, but it allows you to steal one from one of your opponents, which is both good because you add a minion to your army and you take one away from your opponent. I spoke about this in the cleric video. It's very similar to charm, and one of the nice things about it is when you domesticate, charm, or take someone's minion, you also get all the buffs that that minion has. So you can wait till your opponents buff up their minions, and as long as you still have more health than them, you can just domesticate them, take them into your army. And with the other spells that kind of go with the minion-based builds, this is where Bountiful Feast would come into play. You can get your health higher, so you have more minions covered, and you can domesticate them. Only downside is it doesn't work on dragons, and against a lot of the higher ranked players, they're going to be playing a one minion based build, and it's going to be a dragon, so you won't be able to snag that one away. Next, we have Forest Dwellers. All minions you control gain the healing buff for 9 hands. This one I'm going to throw into the D tier, because the last time I used it, healing buff, I believe, is supposed to be 5% of average health pool per hand. So that'd be pretty good, you know, almost 50% boost when you add it up, 5 times 9. But when I used it last time, it seemed to only heal 5% of the minion's actual health as opposed to the average health pool, which made it very diminishing returns. So maybe if in a future patch this is fixed, then it would make its way up to C tier. It's still not, you know, some kind of crazy A or S tier ability, but it needs to be based on average health, because this is one of the ways that you could do a combination of minion-based build, cast Forest Dwellers, let them heal for 50% of the average health pool over the course of those 9 hands, and then you go with the Bountiful Feast and take all that health and add it back to yourself. Because with a minion-based build, you're not just trying to get your minions to be super strong. Ultimately, you want to get those chips to your hero, because your hero is going to be the one who plays better poker than the minions. So we're always keeping that in mind when doing a minion-based build. Is okay, I want to get these guys strong, but how in the end do I end up with these chips? What is the best way they're going to kind of siphon their way back to me? Okay, next we have Forest Blessing. All minions under your control are healed for 25% of your health pool. This is going to be a C tier ability. It's similar to Bless. It's similar to Blood Oath, but the amount is smaller. It's only 25% of your health pool rather than 40. So obviously it's going to be a lower ranked spell. Difference between the Necros and the Druids and the Clerics is the Druids have more ability to win pots just based on poker skill and board changing abilities. So they're often going to be able to build a bigger stack earlier than a Cleric or a Necro would, And therefore, you know, the 25% heal is reasonable when compared to the 40% heal of the other classes that are often going to be shorter stacked. So nice balancing act here by the devs. I will give them props for that. Next, we have Guided Arrow. Target opponent takes 10% of their health pool and damage and gains the poison debuff. This one's going to be A tier for me because poison is such a powerful debuff, limiting people's abilities to gain health from anything other than winning pots. Healing potions don't work. Healing spells like Bark Skin don't work. Hex doesn't work. Leech doesn't work. It really puts a damper on other people's plans if they don't have cleanse debuff spell available. So the 10% damage, not the important part. The fact that the poison debuff is included and I think lasts for 6 hands is a nice benefit to Guided Arrow. It can kind of be the kiss of death if used in the right situation. Next, we have Hibernate. Shelter for 4 hands, 3 at the final table, cannot be used when heads up. This is going to be an A tier ability. I've spoken in previous videos how Shelter is just a really, really important skill to have. This is the lowest duration Shelter buff of the classes. I think Cleric is 5 hands, and I think Necro is 9 hands. Maybe they reduced it to 7. Either way, it's a lot. This is 4. It's the lowest duration, and that's because Druid's just so strong anyway that they found when, you know, Bark Skin wasn't brittle and Hibernate was 6 hands that it was just too easy for the Druids to win everything. So they decreased the duration of Hibernate to make things more balanced, but Shelter is still Shelter. Shelter is still an epic ability, so it's going to be A tier for me. Next, we have Hidden Den. Remove 25% of your health pool for the remainder of the hand. Regain it after showdown. And this one's close. Like, I want to put this in A tier, but I think it's not quite there. It's a really good survival spell because it lets you put some of your chips aside to guarantee you don't get busted on this hand. But if you're all in pre-flop, you won't be able to cast it because you already have all your health in the middle. So you need to not be all in on the flop when this activates and then get all in on a later stream. So if this were pre-flop activation, it'd be better, maybe A tier. But for it to really be like A plus, S tier, it would have to be something that you can activate like pre-flop and under the gun, like before the pre-flop betting even happens, because then you could actually go all in and guarantee you're not going to bust on this hand. Whereas this way, it's like it kind of is all in protection, but only under specific circumstances. And so for those bits of complication, it's going to be B tier, despite the fact that it is an all-in protection spell ability. Next, we have Nature's Affinity. At the start of the event, all minions you control gain 25% starting health and 5% minion leech. B tier ability. One of the best minion build abilities that the Druid has. Maybe the best, actually. The next one coming up's quite good too. But in terms of just like a basic buff, this is very powerful because if you're playing a 5 minion strat or a 6 minion strat, they all get the 25% health boost plus that 5% leech. It's really powerful. It activates right away. And if you're doing a minion based build, the more health they have and the more leech, the better. So Nature's Affinity is kind of a must. Next, we have Nature's Ally. Trade your weakest minion for a bear with 150% average health pool. This is also going to be a B tier ability. It is a minion based build ability. And it is a very nice minion based build ability. We saw on the Necro video, Inferno Pact gave 200% average health, but it was of your strongest minion. You don't want to have to get rid of your strongest minion. This is your weakest minion, and it gives you 150% average health pool. So what I really like to do with this one on my minion-based Druid, Min Diesel, I have 4 strong minions, Angels plus, and then I have 2 succubuses, weak, right? But I cast Nature's Ally right away. Convert one of those succubuses into a bear, which is going to have more health than some of the other minions. And then I can regenerate this ability and cast it again to convert both of my succubuses into bears with nice 150% average health pool. And suddenly I'm starting the game with 6 strong minions with a good amount of leech. Nature's Affinity is already in play. and you got a good army to work with. So if I'm doing a minion based build, that's usually how I'm going to open the game. Nature's Affinity activates, cast Nature's Ally, regrow the ability, cast it again, and then we get into the other buffs of I have Cycle of Life as a backup after I lose a minion. I can domesticate if I lose one of my minions, so I can always kind of stay at 6. And then later on in the game, once I get some health, we can hit them with the Forest Blessing, 25% boost, Forest Dwellers for even more, and then late game we're going to use the Bountiful Feast to take a bunch of that health back and funnel it into our main hero. Okay, next we have Noxious Goblin Sapper. End of hand, Sapper explodes, dealing 10% of opponent's health and damage. Winning the hand, opponent gets poison debuff for 6 hands. This one's going to be a B tier for me. Again, for Sappers to really work, it's not about the 10% damage, it's about the debuff that happens after. And for that to happen, you do have to win the pot. Because poison is such a powerful debuff, I do rank this as a B tier rather than a C tier. But because it requires you to win the pot, I can't put it in A tier, even though, you know, it hits everyone with poison. Whereas the poison arrow or the guided arrow only hits one person. But with the guided arrow, you're guaranteed to get that poison. Whereas Noxious Goblin Sapper, you do have to win the pot. Okay, next we have Predator's Roar. Minions that are not all in fold their hands and surrender 15% of their health. I'm going to put this in D tier. It's similar to what we saw with the Warrior. It's just, how often are you going to be in a pot where there are tons of minions that see the flop? And then that's going to be early game, most likely. So 15% of their health is not going to be very much. Like the one time this is maybe beneficial is if you're playing in a 2-man against someone who's doing a minion build and they have a bunch of minions with a lot of health. But again, how often are all of them going to see the flop? And for that 15% to really be much, it needs to be hitting multiple opponents. So it's not a huge chip up, and it's a pretty rare situation that it's even playable for much value, so it's going to be D tier. All right, Reconstruct. Destroy the turn card and replace it with the next card in the deck. This is S tier, no discussion. One of the Druid's most powerful abilities is the board changing elements that it has. Changing the turn, changing the river, makes it very hard to beat a Druid. If you're trying to draw against a Druid, you need to hit your flush draw or your straight draw twice, because if you hit it on the turn, you can just cast this spell. Oh, try again, sir. Hit it on the river, you can cast an upcoming spell, Stone Shaper. Try again, sir. So this makes it really annoying to play all-ins against Druids. It makes it really not fun to chase draws against Druids. And it makes it so like one of the only ways to really get a Druid out is to outflop them when you get all in. Because if you are all in against a Druid and you are not ahead on the flop, good luck winning that run out. Because if you hit the turn, they're just going to change the turn. If you hit the river, they're just going to change the river. Absolutely essential ability to have on your Druid is Reconstruct. Changing the turn, super powerful. Another ability that is a must-have on your Druid is Regrowth. Reactivate target exhausted ability. I forget if there was a patch. I think there was a patch update that made this activate random exhausted ability as opposed to targeted. So it's not quite as powerful as it once was, again, because the Druid was just running over everybody. They realized they had to make some changes. So this enables you to get one of your abilities back, but you won't know which one it's going to be. It will not be a brittle ability, so you can't use it to get Bark Skin back. And I think, yeah, like Forest, Nature's Affinity, I think is automatic. So it's brittle too. I don't know if you can get that back. Actually, that's kind of interesting, because I don't think it's brittle, but it says at the start of the event, so you probably can't get it back. So even if you've used a couple of abilities, you can know with Regrowth that for sure you're going to get a specific ability back because all the other ones are brittle. The one thing I will say is if you're doing a minion-based build, I typically like to just use Regrowth early to get a second Nature's Ally, because if you save it for late game and a lot of your minions are gone, gaining abilities back like Bountiful Feast and Forest Dwellers and Cycle of Life and Forest Blessing, they're just, or Domesticate when there are no other minions left, they're just pretty useless. So if I'm throwing it on a minion build, it's specifically to double down with Nature's Ally, or if I'm doing Nature's Ally and Domesticate to get my 6 minions, as opposed to doing Nature's Ally twice, then I would want to use it on getting the Forest Blessing back. But again, you can't control that, so it's kind of tough on a minion-based build. If you're using it on a regular Druid build where all your abilities are good to get back, Bear Form's great to get back, Reconstruct is great to get back, a few of the other ones we have coming up are great to get back, then you don't really need to worry about it. So regrowth more powerful on a regular power based build rather than a minion based build. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, next we have Rekindle the Spark. If you have previously folded, you may re-enter the hand by paying all missed bets. Deactivated if cards are turned up. I haven't used this ability all that often, but I'm still gonna rank it as an A tier ability because of the fact that it just seems like really sweet, you know? Like if you folded and you see that you would have made 2 pair, or you would have made trips, or you would have made a sneaky straight, you can hop in with Rekindle the Spark. And your opponents are likely gonna assume you have a good hand. Maybe you could use it as an advanced bluffing technique, but it's a really good way to just hop in there and get a shot at a big pot. Now, I think that if you don't have enough chips to cover all the bets, you can't activate it. So you can't really use it if you're super short stack. That's one downside to it. And usually, for you to know it's a great spot to hop back in, you'd want to know your opponent's cards, be an all-in situation. But in that case, you can't activate it. So it's really best used when you hit some sneaky 2-pair or a sneaky straight, and betting is such that your opponents probably don't have that beat. Or betting is such that your opponents maybe have a big pair, but usually they'll already be all in with that. So it's useful. It's a way you can get some extra chips. It doesn't usually make my top 8 in terms of abilities that I'm using when building out, but it would probably be like a strong number 9. And if I didn't have access to one of my top 8 abilities, I would likely slide it in there because it is a pretty powerful spell. It's also really nice that it activates on the turn, so you get to see most of the hand. If you had to use it on the flop, you don't know if you're going to hit the draw or not, but when you see on the turn that you have completed a made hand, it can be pretty useful to hop back in the action and take a pot that you otherwise wouldn't have played. Okay, next we have Robust Immunity. Remove all debuffs from yourself and minions you control. This is going to be an A tier ability. Absolutely essential when playing in tough lineups to have the abilities that remove debuffs. And as I've said before, the ones that remove the debuffs from your minions as well as yourself, even better. Robust Immunity, absolute must for tough lineups. If you're playing soft lineups or mostly NPCs where you don't have to worry about a lot of spells, you could substitute this for another interesting ability. But when playing a tough lineup, it's pretty much an absolute must. Okay, next we have Soulbound. Bind your fate to another player for 6 hands. Any gains they get will also get 100%. You will also get 100%. Any losses will be 70%. Not counting leech. Can cause elimination deactivated heads up. I did have a little bit of debate about this with the devs and some of the other top ranked druids. For all these videos, I consulted all the top ranked players to get their opinions. But I believe this is an S tier ability. I've used it very effectively, and I've seen some of the top ranked players use this extremely effectively. If you get all in against a player who, whatever, same stack as you, covers you, whatever, you can cast Soulbound and guarantee that at worst case, you're going to break even. Because if you lose that all in, let's say you had 5K and they had 5K and you lose the all in, they went from 5K to 10K. Well, they gained 5K. You gain 100% of their gains, 5K back. If you win the all in, so they lose 5K, any losses will be 70%. You give 3,500 back. So you win the flip, you wouldn't go to 10K, you'd only go to 6,500. Because you have that penalty because you're soulbound, but you're guaranteed to not get busted on that hand. The other thing you can do is if someone has a really big stack and they're running over the table, well, you can soulbound with them, and all the blinds that they're stealing, you will get to receive all those gains as well. So for non-all-in situations where someone's just taking the blinds and antes over and over, you can basically steal those blinds and antes as well. If you know it's a situation where they're going to be raising a lot and no one's going to be contesting their raises, it's a good person to get soulbound to. Finally, if you happen to use soulbound, maybe you're 3-handed and you regenerate and you get soulbound back, if you soulbound both of your opponents, you can't lose. You can't lose, right? If they beat you in a pot, you're going to have a net gain. If you beat them in a pot, the amount you lose is less than the amount you gain. And if one of them beats the other one in a pot, you get 100% of the gains from the winner and only 70% of the damage from the loser. So again, net gain. So extremely powerful spell. I've had so much fun with this spell. It's also just really enjoyable to play. The only downside to it is if someone knows that they are soulbound and they have the chips where they can afford it, they can try to sabotage you by losing enough chips that your 70% losses will lead to elimination. It's usually pretty hard to pull off, and it's a pretty tall order of sacrifice for the player who is soulbound, but that is the one thing to consider, that it can be played around by expert players. Something that can't be played around by expert players is Stone Shaper. Destroy the river card and replace it with the next card in the deck. S tier ability, same as Reconstruct, except it's on the river instead of the turn. These two in conjunction, I mean, that's your Druid bread and butter right there. Change the turn, change the river, heal for a huge amount of the pot. What are you gonna do? This is what makes the Druids extremely tough to beat. If you river them once, you're gonna have to river them again for it to actually stick. And pretty much a must-have on any build, whether you're doing minion-based or power-based. I think it's kind of a must. Next, we have the path is clear. Sit out betting for the rest of the hand while still being eligible to win the entire pot. This one I'm gonna put at C tier. It does sound pretty nice. Sit out betting for the rest of the hand while being eligible to win the entire pot. There are two downsides to it. The first one is you have to cast it on the flop, and if you have a draw, you don't know if you would just hit it and win the pot anyway. And the other thing about it is it's easy for your opponents to play around. If they know that you can win the rest of the pot, if they build a pot, they can just check it down, right? They don't have incentive to put a lot of chips into the pot. So the best time to use this is if you're in the pot against a couple of minions or a couple of NPCs who are more likely to just go off and put it in with whatever random crap that they play, and you get access to a bigger pot. But when you're playing against sharp players, they're going to be aware of this ability and they're usually going to play around it. So that's why in tough lineups, this is going to be a C tier for me. Next, we have Thorns. If you lost at Showdown, winning opponent takes 50% of the pot in health damage. I'm going to put this in C tier. You could maybe debate that it could be swapped with Hidden Den or maybe even the Goblin Sapper to make it into B tier. 50% of the pot damage is pretty significant, but it's only 50%. They're still winning the other 50% of the pot. The one time that this would be really powerful would be if, you know, someone won a pot for all in and a warrior hit them with drinking buddies to take 40%. You hit them with thorns for another 50, and now they only get 10% of the pot. So if there's another effect that is triggering at the same time that's leading them to get less of the pot, and you hit them with thorns, then you can put them in a pretty dire situation. But most of the time, you're just going to be hitting them for that 50% of that particular pot, which, while it is annoying, it's not really going to like take them out of the game or anything, because they did win a pot in the first place for them to get this. I guess it's also decent, like, heads up if you go after a monster pot, like something that's kind of interesting. Let's say both you and your opponent had 100k and you go all in for 100k each. Pot's 200k. Then on the river, you lose it. You cast Barkskin. You get 50% of the pot back. You have 100k and you cast Thorns. Right? Although I don't know if you could cast both of them, actually. Might not be able to. In that case, you'd still be even stacked, even though they just won a big pot. But again, that's like very specific, and Thorns is best used in combination with other things, so it doesn't hit that often. I'm going to leave it C tier. And finally, we have Truth Serum. Opponents choose to either show both whole cards or get the poison debuff for 8 hands. I'm going to put this in D tier, partially to keep the list balanced, and also because, yeah, it's great to get some information about your opponent's hands, but they're going to know whether or not it's more detrimental to them to get poisoned or to give you a bit of information. So it's also, you know, like some other things on this list, kind of easy to play around. But anyway, that's going to wrap up my tier list for the Druid abilities in Heroes of Hold'em. I would love to hear what you think. So please let me know in the comments, you know, what you like about the list, what you might change about the list, or any nice insights you got or better builds you were able to make because of having watched this video. I've played a lot of Druid. I really enjoy the Druid. I've studied a lot of Druid, and I've consulted with all the best players who play the Druid. So this is a very well-researched tier list that I have put together here for you, and I hope you find great benefit in it. So I hope that this information helps you build better heroes, better Druids, get more caches, and ultimately get more wins. Thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, it's been Evan Jarvis saying, you know what to do. Take what you learned, go out there, and get stacking. Peace.